Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. Isis, Escape from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Escape from Transylvania in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Characters aren't what they say, they are what they do. And when it comes down to characters' actions, I often try to apply psychology to them. Now, when it comes down to writing and storytelling, whether it be an ISIS series story or a novel like The Temptation of John Haynes or Spellbound, I always try to apply psychology to my characters. Now, when it comes down to psychology, when you're using it with a character, not only allows us to see what that character is doing, it also allows us to see why they are doing it, and it allows us to understand what motivates them to do what they are doing. And whenever I apply psychology to a character, oftentimes it gives them another layer of depth, and it oftentimes gives them some more dimension than they would have if they were just a character who just went out and did things. And when it comes down to psychology, it's a way that motivates the reader to be compelled to keep reading a story, because the more they learn about a character's motivation for doing things, the more compelled they are to get into the story and to get to know the characters. Because whenever you apply psychology to a character, what it does is it allows the reader to get to know this character's reasons for doing what they do, their reasons for going about things the way they're going about them, and it allows us to understand their whole process of thinking. And that's some of the reasons why I go out of my way to apply psychology to characters in my stories. Now, I first learned about applying psychology to characters from watching Batman the Animated Series. Now, when it came down to Batman the Animated Series, Batman was always having to deal with villains who had these obsessions. And each of these characters had this obsession which drove their motivation to go out here and commit these crimes. And Batman himself had a psychological motivation, the trauma of seeing the murder of his parents at 8 years old. And that's what motivates him to try to protect Gotham City and keep other 8-year-old boys from seeing and suffering the way that he did. But from that classic television series, I learned a lot about the whole concept of psychology and how psychology can be used to craft a story and make very compelling characters. Now, another series I learned about psychology from was Disney's Gargoyles. Now, Disney's Gargoyles back in the 1990s was an extremely cerebral series, and oftentimes there was this chess game between Goliath and David Xanatos. And in that chess game for the castle in the first two seasons, we often saw a lot of psychology used. And both of those cartoons, they laid the foundation for me learning how to craft characters. Now, I also took a course in psychology back in the 1990s, and that's also what I use when I want to reference things as related to using psychology and storytelling. And sometimes when I want to read about things like mental health issues, I also read about them, and I take that information and I apply it to different characters. And when it comes down to when I create characters, I often love to put psychology into a story, because when you put psychology into a story, it allows those characters to really come alive, and it really allows the reader to really become connected to those characters, because when they start to learn what goes on inside of that character's head, it really gets them into the character and see, their thinking process. And when I do this in conjunction with something like the revolving first person perspective, it really brings the reader into the world and allows them to really see the things right there and see and literally be like they're standing there. And the psychology really allows us to see the characters' relationships with each other and what motivates them to have those relationships. Now, when I'm going out here and I do a story like the ISIS series, I oftentimes, again, use psychology when I have ISIS taking on different bad guys. And in one story called The Beauty Myth, I went in with the psychology where where this atheist, Rahima Sanders, was trying to challenge Isis on her Christian beliefs and the fact that she was a new Heliopolitan goddess. And they went into a great psychological back and forth, which led to a very powerful climax in that story. And in another novel, Spellbound, I had the Chantel character who had this deep-seated hatred of the Matilda Crowley character for being a biracial woman. Now, the Chantel character was this dark-skinned, beautiful black woman, but she had this deep self-hatred inside of her and for her own skin tone, and she had all this anger for the Matilda Crowley character, who was a biracial woman born of a black woman and a white father. And when I came in at the story, I wanted to approach it looking at the whole aspect of the whole dark skin, light skin issue, and I really wanted to explore it in a way that enabled people to see what would motivate a dark skinned woman to be angry at a light skinned woman or a biracial woman. And I wanted to show, how this spellbound way of thinking was hurting this character and how she was so caught up in her hatred that she couldn't see the things that were leading to her own self-destruction. And this is something I wanted to go into with those two characters, and I used psychology to get inside of the head of those characters so I could tell a very compelling story about the whole dark skin, light skin dichotomy and the whole issue of dark skin and light skin as related to black women and the issues related to black women in Spellbound, just like I did with Isis and Rahima Sanders in The Beauty Myth, where I was trying to make a commentary on the whole issue of beauty and the whole issue of this old woman coveting this goddess's beauty, and then their beliefs and ideologies, leading to them going back and forth with each other in a psychological tug of war, because you have one woman who believes in God, and then you have the other woman who doesn't believe in God, and she's caught up in her own scientific beliefs, and she wants to try to use science to get what Isis has, and that's what leads to a great, psychological conflict. Now, other books I have used psychology on were books like The Temptation of John Haynes, and as I was crafting the whole Eastine character, I really started to use psychology because I wanted people to understand what was motivating the Eastine character to try to make this compromise where she tried to seduce the John Haynes character. And one of the things that led to her being motivated to try to make this compromise was the fact that your Eastine character felt like she had no other opportunities to get this ladyship she aspired to. And the other thing that led to it was the daddy issues that she had as related to Osiris and her belief of being rejected by Osiris. So she wanted to get this high position because she felt like she had nothing to lose. And what she didn't see was that she was going to lose her own soul in that quest to get that. And that was one of the things that I put in there because I wanted there to be a lot of psychology in The Temptation of John Haynes, where we saw these three characters. The John Haynes character, he was trying to, achieve this success. This Eastine character who was trying to achieve this title. And then you had the Lucifer character who was psychologically trying to manipulate both characters and have them go into this back and forth with each other. And that's what built up into a powerful climax of The Temptation of John Haynes. And I always try to use psychology in stories because, again, I always believe that psychology is a very, very powerful way of developing a character. It allows you to get that extra layer of depth on a character. It allows the characters to really come alive in the reader's imaginations, and it allows us to form a personal connection with those characters, because as we see their motivations for doing what they do, we start to identify with those motivations and see them as our own motivations and behaviors. And usually when I'm out here writing stories, oftentimes as I'm applying psychology, the characters themselves start to come to life and they start telling their own stories, because as I create their motivations, they then go in their own direction. Because whenever you apply psychology to a character, it leads to a very, very interesting story, and it leads to a richer story, a more complex story, and a story that will resonate with the reader over time. So whenever you write a story, always think to apply psychology to your characters, because the more psychology you apply to your characters, the more interesting characters you're going to make, the richer characters you're going to make, the more multidimensional characters you're going to make, and the characters you make are going to be far more compelling to the reader than they would be if they were just characters who did stuff. When you find out why your characters are doing what they do, then it gives you an extra motivation to go to that keyboard every day and start writing your story. If you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications and learn about how I use psychology in my stories, like Isis the Beauty Myth, The Temptation of John Haynes, and Spellbound, you can head over to Amazon.com and pick up those books in paperback or ebook form. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Ascension, The Devil's Dealer reaches a turning point in the life of this powerful E-Steam series story. Get E-Steam Ascension at online booksellers today.